Welcome back to the bloody YouTube channel. I didn't think I'd do another one of these, but here we are. Welcome back to the channel. For those who don't know who I am, my name's Ollie Stringer. I'm an ex-age group triathlete, an ex-track athlete. I am the head coach and owner of Team 26 Performance. I'm a family man and I'm a lover of all things sport, particularly endurance sport. Now, this video is all about my journey that I've been on over the past couple of years battling a heart arrhythmia called ventricular tachycardia. The purpose for me recording this video isn't for sympathy. I've had plenty of that over the years, but it's more in the hope that somebody finds it and it provides some use to them. Somebody who may have been through a similar situation to what I've been through or currently on a journey that I'm on themselves. One of the first things when I was diagnosed with myocarditis originally, and then later ventricular tachycardia, one of the first places I looked for information, for stories, for somebody who had been through a similar situation was YouTube. I spent hours looking for somebody in a similar situation to me, a sportsman, that was going through something similar. Maybe for comfort, maybe for some inspiration or some motivation, or maybe even some answers on how to combat this problem that I have and if there's any chance of returning to sport. And I spoke to lots of different people through social media, through friends of friends. And yeah, it's important for me to say that each individual's situation when it comes to things like heart health or ventricular tachycardia, atrial fibrillation, any of those sorts of things. Each individual's journey is quite unique, but there are certainly things that you can take from each person, whether it's some inspiration or some comfort in knowing that you're not going through something like this alone. So what I want to do, I want to document a bit of a series of me sort of sharing my story of what I've been through, the highs, the lows. There's not many highs, to be honest. The lows, the struggles. But I also want to document my return to fitness. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit of detail and why that's a possibility for me. So this dates back to the end of 2021. So the December in 2021. A few months prior to that, in July 2021, I raced Ironman UK in Bolton. And I qualified for the Ironman World Championships in Kona. And because COVID was at large at the time, the World Championships were pushed back to the following October 2022. However, in the December of 2021, I, like most of the world, caught COVID. And I was training really, really hard at the time. I was fitter, stronger, faster than ever. And I was really enjoying where I was at in my life at that period of time. Feeling very fulfilled with kind of what I was doing. So when I caught COVID, I thought it's a bit of a bummer. I need to isolate because we had to isolate then. I need to also be sensible and recognize that, COVID is real and it is dangerous. So I stopped training. I was a little poorly as well, but I wasn't, suffering as bad as some people were. It felt like a very strong version of the flu to me. So stopped training completely. And I isolated with my partner Emily over the Christmas period and New Year and waited until the symptoms had completely gone and waited until I tested negative before I returned to any form of exercise. And when I did return to exercise, I started very, very easy first and I started to build it back up. And all of the kind of metrics that I would usually look at to determine if I was in good health, so like my exercise heart rates, my resting heart rate, my heart rate variability, all of these sorts of things, my energy levels and how I was feeling on a day-to-day basis, all seemed to be in normal ranges. So that for me was a good sign to, just crack on with training and, get back to the sport and get back to preparing for the World Championships. Unfortunately, one of the first bike sessions that I did, which was quite a tough bike session, I ended up having a bit of a cardiac event. Let's call it that. So after finishing one of the reps on the bike, I was pushing significant power. My heart rate was really, really high. I remember sitting up on the bike and something not feeling quite right. My heart rate had shot up through the roof. And when I say shot up through the roof, I was already operating at about 170 to 180 beats per minute in the session, but my heart rate had gone north of 250 beats per minute, and it wasn't beating regularly. I knew straight away that something was wrong, and I actually felt like I was having a heart attack. I felt sick, I felt nauseous, I felt really tight chested, I felt like I couldn't really breathe that well. My hearing went a little bit funny as well, and I sort of vaguely remember like being a little bit dazed in my sight as well. So I almost like collapsed to the floor off the bike. And my partner, Emily, she was doing a bike session next to me, and she didn't think anything of it. She just assumed that it wasn't out of the ordinary for me to be pushing myself really, really hard on the bike, and after the session getting off and lying down on the floor. That's how hard I would push myself in training. But something wasn't right. I got myself into the bathroom, waited for my heart rate to come back down, but it wasn't. It was almost like it was stuck at this really, really high beats per minute. So I called for Emily and told her that I think I'm having a heart attack. I've never had a heart attack before. I don't know what it feels like, but tight chested, heart rate was through the roof, feeling really clammy, feeling really dizzy. And yeah, she called an ambulance. She put me in the lazy W position. And yeah, we basically had to drive to A&E because all of the ambulances were out. And I think it was probably an hour's wait for an ambulance to arrive. On the journey to the hospital, my heart rate actually went back to normal. And I started to feel a lot better, albeit still a little bit nauseous, a little bit dazed, and a little bit confused as to what had actually happened. But as soon as I arrived at hospital and explained what happened, that was it. Then I was in for lots of tests, blood tests, ECGs, all of that sort of stuff. ECGs came back normal with some abnormalities like PVCs, premature ventricular contractions, but they're not sort of out of the ordinary too much. But what was concerning is I had a blood test and the troponin level. So troponin is a protein released by the heart into the bloodstream, I think. I've got that right. If the heart has been damaged. So that was a bit of a red flag. So they repeated the blood tests an hour or two later, and that troponin level had continued to increase. So that basically booked me in to Wythenshawe Hospital for quite a long stay. So I had to do all sorts of other tests when I was there. And the conclusion was I had myocarditis. Now, myocarditis is a viral is inflammation of the heart caused by a viral infection. So putting two and two together, having just had COVID, it's likely COVID had given me myocarditis. Obviously, you don't know you have myocarditis. It doesn't really, or it didn't for me, give me any kind of symptoms. It was just inflammation of the heart, despite me feeling normal. So they think or assume that obviously I pushed too hard with this inflamed heart and had some sort of cardiac event. Now, as I mentioned, my heart rate went back to normal on the way to the hospital. So when they did an ECG, they didn't capture any kind of arrhythmia. So they couldn't really diagnose what that arrhythmia was. They just kind of had to take my word for it. So we did cardiac MRIs. The cardiac MRIs came back showing that I had a faint scar on my heart as well. And that was unclear as to whether I had got that from the cardiac event or previously. It's not uncommon for endurance athletes to have some small scarring on their heart. So the advice was to stay away from exercise for several months, let the heart or the myocarditis resolve itself, which it does over time. Then they'll repeat some tests to make sure that it had gone. And then at that point, we could then return to a phased return to exercise and then start preparing for the World Championships. So that was the plan, and that's what we did. So I took 3-4 months off, I think it was, in the end, and then returned to some very, very easy exercise. I did have a little bit of health-related anxiety when I got back to doing some exercise, but I quickly grew in confidence as, I was doing my training and things felt normal and looked normal. So we managed to get a good 4 or 5 months of training for the World Champs. Performed really well there, hit my goal of going sub 10 hours, and I thought that all of this heart issue was now in the past. So cool. move on with my life and not worry about that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there. So off the following sort of, I want to say maybe 18 months after the World Championships, I kept having repeat episodes of this really, really fast heart rhythm and almost like my heart getting stuck there. And it didn't necessarily have to be doing intense exercise when it happened. And when I would end up in this arrhythmia, I'd sometimes be in it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And I'd start to feel really poorly, really faint. I kept really worried about as to what was going to happen. And I'd obviously done a little bit of Googling as well and researched that, arrhythmias could be atrial fibrillation, they could be ventricular tachycardia, and I'd understood the risks of those arrhythmias and the fact that they can be life-threatening because they can lead to cardiac arrests and things like that. So obviously, naturally, very, very anxious. The frustrating thing about all of these episodes is whenever I would ring the ambulance and try and get help, by the time they'd got to me, my heart rate had gone back to normal. So the first thing they would do is put an ECG on me, they'd look at it, they'd assume everything was normal, but I'd have to go to hospital and they would do the same thing. They'd do a blood test, they'd see troponin elevation, they would repeat that blood test, and then they would see that it had, doubled or tripled. And then again, that would book me straight back into hospital for more tests. And that happened on several occasions. And then I had quite a bad episode. So in June 2024, I was out in Lanzarote at Club La Santa with the coaching company that I worked for at the time. And everything felt normal. I was actually really fit at the time. And I was coaching a track session. So I wasn't even doing the track session. And I remember doing a little jog between the 200-meter start of the track and towards the finish. And my heart just went into this ridiculous rhythm again. And at the time I thought, right, okay, don't panic. It'll do what it's always done. It'll stick at this for 20, 30, 40 minutes. It'll go back to normal, but you'll probably just have to take it easy for the remainder of your time. And we were there to play lots of sports and get involved and have like a team bonding trip. But after an hour, I was still in this rhythm. After 90 minutes, still in this rhythm. After 2 hours, I was feeling really poorly, really anxious. I felt nauseous. I felt like really dizzy. And at that point, I was thinking I might never get out of this. I need to call an ambulance. So we got an ambulance to come, and then it was pretty much blue lights to the hospital. In the ambulance trip, I took a really bad turn. So I don't really remember much of it, but I remember feeling awful. And I actually thought at that point I was probably going to go into cardiac arrest. And I don't know what, I honestly don't really know what I was thinking, but I was also trying to make peace with the fact that I was in an ambulance and I was on the way to a hospital. And that's, despite being in this heart rhythm, quite a good position to be in if something was to happen. On arrival to the hospital, they were already waiting for me. They wheeled me in a wheelchair very quickly down a corridor. And then I remember going into a room, lots of nurses getting me out of this wheelchair. They put me straight onto a bed. I was kind of thinking, what on earth is happening here? I felt really sick. So I also remember trying to I was like retching as well. They put me on the bed. I remember them pulling my shirt up, t-shirt up, and yeah, I just remember a woman appearing over the top of me as I lay down, saying, "Sir, we are going to defibrillate you now." So, and at the time, I was just nodding because I was just like, "Sort me out. I don't care what it takes." And then a couple of seconds later, I was hit with this. It's hard to explain, but like a big bolt of electricity that just made everything just stiffen up. And I vaguely remember letting out this just absolutely ridiculous noise. And it sorted me out. That put me back into a normal sinus rhythm. So once I'd done that, I was then moved to the intensive care unit where I spent a couple of days in Lanzarote Hospital. I literally could not move from my bed. So I literally had to piss and shit in the bed, in a bedpan. I obviously didn't shit the bed, but you know what I mean. And it was there when the nurse came to see me. She confirmed that it was actually ventricular tachycardia that I was in, and the defibrillator, the cardioversion, shocked me at a heart rate of 280 beats per minute. And obviously, hearing that and having read what I'd read about VT, it was obviously devastating. I was kind of hoping that this arrhythmia was something that was just a nuisance and a minor and was very, very easily corrected. And it turned out that it's this whole time it's been this life-threatening arrhythmia. So that was really difficult to take. I left Lanzarote and had to go straight to Manchester. Long story short, oversight on my part, don't judge me for this. I went to Lanzarote for a weekend and completely forgot to get travel insurance. So an absolute nightmare. I basically needed to self-discharge because they wanted to do all of the tests, all of the possible procedures in Lanzarote. In fact, it wasn't Lanzarote. They actually wanted to air ambulance me to Gran Canaria, and I was obviously thinking, I cannot afford this. I need to get back to the UK under the NHS and get seen to there. So I left Lanzarote Airport, went straight to the Lanzarote Hospital, went straight to the airport, went straight from the airport at Manchester to Manchester Royal Infirmary, where I then continued treatment. When I was at Manchester, we spoke about multiple options. We knew it was now ventricular tachycardia. We'd actually discovered that, I'd been having ventricular tachycardia this whole time, and that obviously wasn't good news. So the plan of action was either an ablation, but the problem with the ablation was they couldn't find any specific site within my heart to ablate. An ablation is basically cauterizing, think of like a bundle of cells or a small area where the electrical fault is originating from. So they couldn't find that. So they couldn't just go in there and ablate anything because they didn't know what to ablate. So the only option we had was to have an ICD fitted, and that's an internal cardioverter defibrillator. So the one I've got sits in my chest under my pectoral muscle, and I've got a dual chamber device. So I have a wire that runs from that device into each side of my heart. And the cool thing about this is if I go into ventricular tachycardia, it can deliver therapy. And that therapy can look like something called anti-tachycardia pacing, where it'll use lots of rapid impulses to pace me out of a dangerous rhythm and get me back into a normal sinus rhythm, or it can deliver a full-blown shock. I've had the ICD now for 18 months, and it has had to deliver therapy on multiple occasions. I've received one shock, and I've received two or three bouts of anti-tachycardia pacing. So that is currently where I'm at today. When I was in hospital and when I had this received and implanted on the 1st of July 2024, that was the point that I was told I wouldn't be able to compete in triathlon anymore. I was told that I shouldn't swim freestyle because of the repetitive nature of bringing your arm above your head can dislodge the wires, and when a wire is dislodged, it's then not effective at delivering the therapy. And having lived my life the way I lived my life for many, many years, for the best part of 20 years, training every single day, whether it be for athletics or for triathlon, and my whole routine and identity and purpose, if you will, was surrounded by sport, or sport was central to it. To have that taken away at such a young age, I'm 30, what was I, 32 at the time, 31, 32. That was a horrible thing to hear. It dragged me into a place of poor mental health. I no shame in saying that, and had to learn the hard way what actually mental health is. So yeah, that was really, really rough. That took a long time to get over. And in maybe for the first 12 months of having the ICD put in, I was incredibly anxious about any movement that I did. If I got up off the couch, if I walked a flight of stairs, if I was crossing the road and realized the car was going a little bit too quick and had to shuffle quickly to get to the other side, I'd go into complete panic mode. I'd have this dump of anxiety. My heart rate would shoot up. Naturally, not through, the fact that I was in an arrhythmia. It's just kind of physiology doing physiological things. But that feeling that heart rate go up was it was awful. It was so anxiety inducing, and I'd become so hyper vigilant to my own heartbeat. There were periods where I could literally just sit on the couch watching TV. The only thing I could hear was my heartbeat. That's the only thing that I was attuned to at the time. And I became so withdrawn in myself, lost a hell of a lot of confidence in myself, felt like I'd lost my identity, my purpose, if you will, which is difficult for me to say now because I know that there is so much more to life. I've got a beautiful family, a beautiful daughter, and they are my sole purpose. But it's really difficult going through these things where you're brought internally by something and you basically feel like your world is just crumbling down. And it's incredibly difficult to deal with. But what I will say is I'm incredibly proud of how I navigated that whole situation. Naturally, there were times where I felt awful, didn't want to get out of bed, had absolutely no motivation, had no energy. I was on beta blockers, heart medications that slow you down and made me feel like a zombie. And I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how to be. But I have an incredible support network around me. I have a really supportive partner that, we got to a stage where if I let her knew that I was having a bad day, she would know how to react and respond and how to pick me back up. And I think that was so important at the time. And obviously having a daughter, like they are like, she's my lifeblood. So it was nice. I often talk about the situation to my partner, and I often say, if I went through this situation and I didn't have you and I didn't have Maya, and I honestly don't know what I would have done. Which does sound quite morbid, but honestly, that's how I feel. I don't know. So it's been really, really tough. Recently, I've been working with, or I say recently, for the past 18 months, I've been working with a fantastic sports cardiologist called Dr. Anil Malhotra. I'm very grateful to be transferred from the NHS to him because I think he does most of his work privately. But he's a sports specific cardiologist. And with me being a sportsman or ex sportsman now, it needed somebody with his expertise to take me on and give me the right course of treatment to potentially, overcome this situation. The news I've received recently in the past couple of months is that now an ablation procedure to correct the rhythm is now an option. And the reason it's an option is because of that really big episode that I have in Lanzarote. Since then, I've had quite an irregular heart rhythm. I have lots of PVCs, which are premature ventricular contractions. And modern medicine is brilliant, and some very, very clever people out there. And I hope I don't butcher this, but if you see PVCs on an ECG reading, you can, well, I can't, but professional people, cardiologists, can work out where those PVCs are originating from in the heart. And because I've not got any cardiomyopathy or heart disease or anything like that, my heart generally is structurally very, very healthy and sound. They assume that these PVCs are coming from the same part of the heart that the ventricular tachycardia is originating from. So now an ablation is an option. So in a really weird way, I'm quite thankful for that big episode in Lanzarote because it seems to have brought something else to the table, which means, okay, there's other avenues that we can explore here. So I'm now on the waiting list for an ablation procedure. I'm hoping that happens within the next 4 months. So I'm assuming around April time. If it is successful, and I'm quoting my cardiologist here, I'm not making this up, but there's like an 80 to 90% chance, if the ablation is successful, that VT does not reoccur. And when I heard that in my consultation about the ablation procedure, there was tears in my eyes. I thought those odds are just absolutely ridiculous. Like, I want to move forward with this ablation immediately. If I had the money, I would have it done privately next week. I wouldn't wait around and get it done, but unfortunately, it's very, very expensive, and I just don't have that cash lying around. Plus, I've been battling this thing for years now. Waiting 6 months for a procedure is no significant amount of time at all. So that's where I'm at. As I mentioned at the start, I can't remember if I did now. I've been chatting waffle that whole time, but I do want this to be part of a series. I want to document everything that I go through from now moving forward with my heart, and I want to bring you along to any sort of appointments. Obviously, I won't be able to film the surgery, but I want to document my return and getting back to exercise and seeing how that progresses. And if I can, and I don't know what the future looks like, be able to get back to potentially racing 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, and those sorts of things. It'll be interesting to see if I do have the ability to do that and, be sort of limits free to be able to do that, because having been what I've been through, I think if I was given a second chance at being a competitive athlete, I would be a far greater athlete now than what I was back then, purely because not a single second of any session or exercise will ever be taken for granted ever again. Having it stripped away through no fault of my own has been honestly like imprisonment in my own body. And for those who can empathize with what I'm saying there, you have my entire sincere sympathy. And I really, really think about people that are in this similar situations to this, where they can't do what they're passionate about. It's mentally incredibly damaging to have to go through that. So yeah, that's I'd be so grateful to have that opportunity again. And just I want to extend that even further in saying that, if you're a sports person, in endurance sport, we can get really bogged down with performance and become so one track minded on performance and PBs and titles or podiums and all of this, and sometimes take the process of getting ourselves to the best sporting version of ourselves for granted. And you never should. If you enjoy the process and take every second of exercise and have that attitude of gratitude with it, you will be a far superior athlete and perform much, much higher than you have ever imagined. And I can promise you that. Don't get bogged down with results. Don't get bogged down with races or focusing what and anybody else is doing. Don't give a shit about them. Just focus on you and enjoy the process, and just be grateful for what your body allows you to do on a day-to-day basis without limitations. So, like I said, this is going to be part of a series. This is essentially episode 1. If you want to come along for the journey, if you're interested, hit the like and subscribe button. Those are a couple of words I never thought I'd ever say in my life, because I didn't ever think I'd be on YouTube, but here we are. And yeah, peace out.